Hello, welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is generating test data using Azure Logic Apps and Model Context Protocol. Let's go. Alright, so why this particular topic? So on this channel I've talked about MCP servers a lot lately. This was one of the projects I've been working on, so naturally those things go hand in hand. And I recently had sort of a new use for MCP servers. And historically I tend to focus on more of like the business integration of like, hey, how can we use this in the business to drive usage, and like what are these sort of capabilities that we're enabling, and really sort of more focused on like that business persona than perhaps the developer persona. Now, I've been helping out some colleagues with a demo, an upcoming demo that we've got planned, and needed to create a bunch of data for that particular demo. So needed to create hundreds of records inside of Dataverse. And so this got me thinking, I bet I could use an LLM, Azure Logic Apps, and VS Code in order to go do this and create this data. Now, naturally, when creating data, you need to have some normalcy of that particular data. Like, you want it to be somewhat contextually relevant. Like if you're creating sales order, you want the descriptions to be relevant. You want quantity to be relevant. You want like specific dates, like the create date, the invoice paid date. But you also want it to be kind of relevant. Like you don't want it to be completely static in order to go do that. And so that's where I thought, hey, we could actually use a prompt to go ahead and describe the data set that we're interested in, and then actually let the large language model go ahead and construct that data. And then naturally we need to get that data into Dataverse. So how do we go ahead and use our connectors to go help with that as well? And so I'm going to focus in this video, this demo, more on like the VS Code and the large language model side of things. And if you haven't seen our MCP capabilities before, I will put a link in the description of how you can go ahead and build a Dataverse MCP server using Azure Logic Apps and API Center. The API Center is optional, but it really does streamline the experience. So I'd go ahead and check out that video if this is a new topic for you. Alright, so let's flip over to VS Code and see a demo of this in action. Alright, so I'm in VS Code here, and I do have a series of MCP servers that have been enabled for me. Once again, go ahead and check out that video if you are sort of interested in how you get this set up. Now, one that we're going to use here is this Fourth Coffee Risk Management. And this is going to be the MCP server. We can see it's already running. We can see that there's 3 tools that are available. And if we head over to our toolbox and we search for risk management, we can see that sure enough, here are the tools. So we can go ahead and add a new row or list a row or update a row. Now, we're just going to focus on these first 2 tools for this particular video. So as mentioned, we do want to go ahead and and create data. So I'm going to go ahead and copy in a prompt here, and we will use this prompt to go ahead and drive our data schema. So here we want to create a sales order. Now we want to create 40 records, and the company that we're creating these records for is called Northwind Traders. We need to have an order number that needs a format of this, where these hash marks are random 7-digit numbers. The sales order should have a random value between $1,000 and $4,000. The invoice date should vary, for this particular range. The date paid should also vary, but it should vary based upon the previous date that was provided. So here's some intelligence that we're actually doing this. We wouldn't want to have an invoice paid date that is actually before the invoice was issued. That wouldn't make sense. And then for the order description, keep it less than 40 characters, and the topic should be related to coffee orders. Now this is kind of interesting. For notes, comment on how quickly they paid their invoice, and you can mark the order as 4, which maps to the invoice being complete inside of Dataverse. So once again, we're going to go ahead and use some insights. So our data is going to be fairly relevant here. It's not going to just be total random gobbledygook that we actually store in our database. So let's go ahead and let's add this, and we'll see that it's actually going to go ahead and make these calls. Now, what's interesting is the MCP tool itself is only going to support creating 1 record. Obviously, we could have changed that and did more of a batch, but this will actually go ahead and make the calls one by one. And so you will want to think about throttling if you have very large data sets. But what is really interesting about this is it's going to be very sort of diverse in terms of the data being passed. Okay, so it's come back and said that it's going to create 40 test sales orders in 4 parallel branches of 10, which actually sounds good because once again, we don't want to run into any sort of throttling thing. So what it's doing is it's calling it one by one. Now I've approved for this session. You can go ahead and click the button each time it actually runs, but that's not the greatest use of time, right? So this is just going to go ahead and incrementally add each of these new sales orders. Here we can actually see the payload that's being sent to the particular MCP tool, and then we can actually see the response of that call as well. So I'll pause the recording here just as it works through these different batches. Okay, here we can see that the 40 sales orders were created based upon our particular requirements, so that's pretty cool. Now if we just want to make sure that this all works and this wasn't just all smoke and mirrors, let's go ahead and grab one of these order numbers, and then what we'll do is we're just going to put in another prompt here. Let me just go ahead and find it. Alright, so I've got my prompt here, so I want to go ahead and list sales order, and I want to go ahead and filter. Now this particular list rows does include this particular filter, and we want to go ahead and find that particular order number that we previously talked about. So this is going to go ahead and run that particular tool, and we should just see that we do have this particular sales order available to us in our tool, just validating that it did work. And if we show this, right, we can actually see this information that was returned to us. So that's good news. All right, so that concludes the video. And I think kind of the uber point here is that sometimes data prep can take a lot of time, and that using a large language model can actually go ahead and help you do that. And I know there's like tools like ChatGPT and stuff like that can help you create that data set, but it only is valuable if you actually want to use it. And how do you go ahead and use it? And I think that's where the connectors make a ton of sense. Also, I sometimes get asked about, hey, why are you always showing MCP tools being called inside of a dev tool like GitHub Copilot? And this would be a good example of how you can go ahead and use it to help you out and go ahead and create data from that perspective. Another question I do get from time to time is, what about Agent Loop? Is Agent Loop going to support MCP server functionality? The answer is yes, it's been worked on, and look for updates in the not too distant future about that capability as well. So hopefully this gives you some ideas on how you can use Logic Apps and MCP servers. Thanks for checking it out.